Good morning. We are at Masechet Pesahim, Daf 56, Nun Vav. Very interesting Gemara about six items, the practices of the people of Jericho. Since we're talking about different customs and practices, we have these people of Jericho. They seem to be kind of an outlier group of Jews, and this is extremely significant because in the Talmud we learned a lot about the rabbis in rabbinic communities, but what about other communities that lived outside the main centers of rabbinic activity? What were their practices? What were the practices of common Jews? What happened to the sectarians of the second Bet HaMikdash period? And so this Mishnah records this like really interesting group. It kind of reminds you of today when you meet Ethiopian Jews or people from far-flung countries that were out of touch for centuries, and they have lots of different and interesting customs. So let's see the six practices of the people of Jericho. Shisha devarim asu anshe Yericho al shelosha michu biyadam v'al shelosha lo michu biyadam. Regarding three of them, the rabbis protested, and regarding three, they did not protest. It sounds like they were not favorable to any of them, but you got to pick your battles. So three of them weren't so bad; they were tolerable, and three were not. What you see here is like the rabbis are in touch with them and have some influence over them, but not 100% influence. And so this is like the rabbis asserting their authority over Jews in various cities. Okay, ve'elohen shalom yichu biyadam. We'll start with the ones that the rabbis tolerated. Markivin dekalim kol hayom. On the 14th of Nisan, they would do this work. They would graft trees together. Now, grafting trees as kilayim is a sumin ha-Torah, so it doesn't mean that they were doing that. These were observant people. The Gemara is going to explain that they were pollinating the trees, and yet the rabbis tolerated it. Doesn't say why. Perhaps because it's davar ha'aved, it would cause loss. You have to pollinate these trees right at the right time, and so they would do that throughout the 14th. Okay, that's the connection to our Perek. The rest of them have nothing to do with Pesach. Kodachin et Shema. When they said Shema, they would say it improperly. They would abbreviate it, not pause in the right place. The Gemara will tell us where. V'kosrin v'godshin lifnei ha'omer, and they would reap and pile grain before the omer. Now, the omer that we bring on the 16th of Nisan is Reshit Ketzirehem. We're supposed to only start reaping after the 16th, any of the grain for that year, and yet they would preempt and start cutting and piling up the grain even before that. This seems to be against the Torah. However, the rabbis teach it's only totally prohibited in areas of the plain areas where the grain grows nicely. But they lived in the valleys, or their fields were in the valleys. That's not great for growing grain, and that's why they could be more lenient regarding this. The Mishnah says cutting and piling. We're going to see later that we're going to have to erase the word cutting because of another braita that contradicts this. Okay, so those are the three things that the rabbis tolerated. And here's the three things that the rabbis reprimanded them. Matirin gamziyot shel hekdesh. The people in Jericho, they made a tree hekdesh. They thought only the trunk is hekdesh. Anything that grows from it, they said we can prune and we can take and use and eat and burn, and they took it for themselves. And the rabbi said, no, that is hekdesh. You're not allowed to do that. Fruit that fell on its own on Shabbat. Problem is mukseh. You might climb up the tree. So the rabbis prohibited it. They permitted it. And the rabbi said, that's not good. And they left a corner of their vegetable gardens for the poor. And the rabbi said they should not do that. Why not? Isn't that nice to give that? Well, a peah only has to be given for grapes and olives and grain, not for vegetables. So you say, well, they're being extra generous by giving their vegetables to the poor also. Yeah, but every chomrah comes with the kula also. Peah, you do not have to bring teruma and maaser. And so now that they're leaving the corner of the field without taking teruma and maaser for the poor, they're causing the poor to eat tebel. So that they're being generous, but to the poor, but they're not giving the proper teruma maaser because of that. Okay, good. So those are the six items. and here 3 and 3. Now that we mentioned 6 items, that reminds us of another baraita that about Hezekiah. Okay, so let's see what this baraita. This has nothing to do with the people of Jericho. It just happens to be another list of 6. Tenor Rabbanan, Shisha Debrim Asa Chizkiah HaMelech. There are 6 things that King Hezekiah did during his reign. Al Shelosha Hodulo, Al Shelosha Lo Hodulo. Regarding 3, the rabbi said, great, Chazak Baruch. And regarding 3, they said, this is not good that you did that. Okay, these criteria are a little bit different from Mishnah. In our Mishnah, the rabbis didn't like anything they did. 3 of them they tolerated, and 3 of them they dug their heels in and said they shouldn't do. But over here, there were 3 positive things and 3 negative things. What were the positive things? Gerer atzmot aviv al mita shel habalim vehodu lo. Chizkiah's father, King Ahaz, was very evil. And when he died, King Hezekiah took the bones of his father and desecrated them. The pasuk only says that his body was not brought to the tombs of the kings of Israel. In other words, he was buried elsewhere, not in an honorable way. The Gemara is adding to that he dragged his father's body through the street, which is certainly much more disgraceful. And the rabbi said that's good because he was an evil person. Aviv kitet nechash nechoshet vehodulo. He also, this is explicit in the Pesukim in Sefer Melachim. He took the copper snake that Moshe Rabbeinu had made when there was the people complained there was a plague, and they stopped the plague by making this copper snake, and everybody looked up to it and they remembered Shamayim, and the plague stopped. That copper snake was around for hundreds of years. They kept it along, they kept it going. However, the people were using it as idolatry, and therefore King Hezekiah destroyed it, and the rabbi said, Hazaku Baruch. It's an unbelievable pasuk, right? Imagine you had something from Moshe Rabbeinu that was this holy object, and yet because it was being misused, it was proper to destroy it. Okay, and lastly, Ganaz Sefer Refot vehodulo. He had a book of cures. This is not found in the Tanakh. And he destroyed it. Why? Well, maybe some of them were good medications, but probably a lot of them were idolatrous or magic, and was causing the people to go off the derech. And so he destroyed it. I don't know if we lost some good medical advice there, but overall, these were positive things that Hezekiah did. But here are the 3 negative things. When the king of Assyria came and said, we're going to conquer you, and he said, no, well, we'll be loyal to you, we'll pay you. And so in order to raise the money to stave off Ashur's attack, he had to cut down the golden doors of the Bet HaMikdash and give it to the king. And the rabbi said this is not a good thing to do. They have good precedent. Yeshaya was there also and said, don't give in to Ashur, right? Don't worry, Hashem will protect you. They're going to go away. And Hezekiah was too subservient to them. Satam megichon ha'alyon velo hodulo. He also closed up the upper Gihon stream, right? It says in Tanakh that he closed up the springs all around Jerusalem because he didn't want the Assyrian army to benefit from them. And he also made this famous tunnel that probably most of you walked through, this amazing feat, and he had to stop up the pool on top in order to do this. And both of these were against Assyrian attacks, but they were harmful to his own population. And so they might have been good military tactics, but Yeshaya Navi and the rabbis here are against it. He also celebrated Pesach, and it says in Divrei Yamim that when he celebrated Pesach, why? Because in the first month of Nisan, the people were not yet holy, they were not purified, and they didn't come to Jerusalem. So he's like, there's nobody here. So he delayed it and did Pesach Sheni for everyone. And the way the Gemara interprets this is that he added an extra month. We add a second Adar, but the rabbis say you're not allowed to add an extra Nisan because Nisan has to be the first of the month, the first of the year, first month of the year, and you can't have a second one. And so the rabbis were upset. You should have just made Pesach in that first month. Whoever's there is there. Okay, so those are the 6 items that Hezekiah did. Interestingly, this baraita, if you look in the book of Mishnayot, look in your Kahati Mishnah, this is found in the Mishnah, right? This baraita is in the Mishnah, and then in the Gemara, it's a baraita. So this is very interesting, and it's worth looking for a second at the manuscripts. Here are all the Bavli manuscripts. Here's this paragraph that's found in the Vilna edition. However, you see in 1, 2, 3, 4 manuscripts it's not found. It is found in Munich 95. There's more. There's a lot of manuscripts for this section here. I guess this was studied popularly. It's also not found here. Another 5th one. It is found in these 3. It's not found in this Vatican manuscript. Or in any of these 3 Geniza fragments, this section is not found. So you see, really, in most of the manuscripts and the best manuscripts, this baraita does not exist at all. This comes from Masechet Berachot, where it is quoted, and it seems it was transferred here, but at a late date, and that's why it did not get into most of the manuscripts. Also, the Gemara does not discuss it. Does not analyze it at all. So therefore, even though this appears in our printed editions of Mishnah as a Mishnah, and it appears in the Gemara as a Baraita here, in fact, this comes from Masechet Berachot as a Baraita and is only transferred here and is not original. Okay, anyway, I'm glad it's here because it's super interesting and we got to study it. And now we go back to the people of Jericho. And so we're going to go through each of these 6 and give a comment on it. Regarding the pollinating trees, we're going to see 2 opinions. Was it about pouring a concoction, or did they actually insert one tree into the other? Let's see. And then regarding the sandwiching Shema, is it that they didn't pause or didn't punctuate, or they skipped Baruch Shem? We'll see a long Agadah regarding Baruch Shem. And then regarding the reaping and piling, they're going to erase the word reaping. Okay, so let's see these 3. Markivin dekalim kol hayom. All the day of the 14th of Nisan, they would be grafting trees. What did they do exactly? They prepared this medication for the tree that was made out of fresh myrtle, beer made out of laurel tree. They took flour that had been ground within 40 days. They put it into a vessel. They boiled it all together and they poured it right into the core of the tree. And that was very good. It helped the tree grow a lot. And this was so good for that tree that tree would grab all the nutrients from the ground and all the trees around it would wither, right? That's how good it was for that tree, even at the expense of its neighbors. Okay, so that's one opinion, that they made this this elixir for the tree. But so in other words, they weren't actually grafting; they were just helping the tree in some way. They put a male branch into a female branch. What does this mean? These palm trees have female flowers that need pollinating with the pollen that's on the male branches. So usually, if you just let it go by itself, the wind will come and take some of the pollen there, and that's how it grows. Nowadays, they do it artificially with centrifuges and sprays. But in those days, they would take one of these branches and put it into these flowers so that the pollen would go there directly. So it looks like grafting because you're putting 2 branches together, but they were not. It's not prohibited because it's the same species that they're putting together. And so this was the rabbis did not favor this, but they tolerated it. And it seems that the people of Jericho did this on all day on 14th because when the time is right, it has to be done that day. Otherwise, it will lead to financial loss. Good. And next, kodchin et Shema. They would sandwich the Shema. What did they do? אמר רבי יהודה, אומרים שמע ישראל, השם אלוקינו, השם אחד, ולא היו מפסיקים. They would say אחד and then go right into ואהבת, אחד ואהבת. And they wouldn't pause here. Why is it important to pause? Well, the first pasuk is where we're mekabel ol malchut shamayim, and you have to concentrate. We say the daled longer, and we also add baruch shem kol malchut olam va'ed. I think this is the reason actually why we add that pasuk, is because you should pause here, accept the kingship of the yoke of heaven. And so they didn't do that. They went right into v'havta and didn't take time to concentrate on the first pasuk. And so the rabbis were not favorable to this, but they didn't protest. They let it go. רבא אמר מפסיקין היו אלא שאומרים היום על לבביך דמשמע היום על לבביך ולא מחר על לבביך. No, that's not. Rabbah says they punctuated. They didn't say the ta'amim correctly. It says והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מסבך היום על לבביך. It should be these words that I'm teaching you today. They should be on your heart all the time, but they would put the word hayom not with misavecha, but with hayom alevavecha. These words should be today on your heart, which implies only today we'll take them to heart, but tomorrow we're going to ignore them. And so they didn't put the tadha in the right place. So that's important. We should always make sure to say the ta'amim correctly in Kiriyat Shema. Another, a third opinion. That's the same as Rav Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda omer, that's the same as Rav Yehuda's opinion. Rav Yehuda's second generation Amora. And that's the same as Rabbi Meir the Tana. Rabbi Yehuda the Tana omer mafsikin hayu ela shelo hayu omrim baruch shem kevod malchuto olam va'ed. Yeah, they would pause for a few seconds between ehad and v'avta, but that's not sufficient. You're supposed to say baruch shem, and you see how this would really highlight the fact that you are accepting all malchut. That's why he has the word malchut there. Malchut shamayim. Okay, I think this is the peshat reason why we say baruch shem k'malchuto olam va'ed. However, we next bring a famous agada. Why do we say? Why, in fact, do we say baruch shem k'malchuto olam va'ed? Because of this this story, this agada. Damar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Vayikra Yaakov el banav vayomer ha'asifu v'yagid alachem. When Yaakov called all his children together, he says, "Come, and I'm going to tell you what's going to happen at the end of days." Bikesh Yaakov legalot banav kes hayamin. He wanted to reveal to them the end of days. V'nistalaka menu shechina. And then all of a sudden, shechina left him. He was stuck. What happened? Perhaps there is in my bed, in other words, within my progeny, there is someone who is unfit. Abraham had two children, and yet one, Ishmael, was unfit. And Yitzhak also had one of that's unfit. So maybe among the 12 tribes here, some of you are not going to be part of the Berit. And because you're here, I'm not able to receive this prophecy. And so they said, listen, Israel, right? The Peshat of the Pasuk is Moshe is telling Bnei Israel and teaching them this principle that God is one. But the Midrash takes it as the children of Israel, as Yaakov saying, listen, our father Israel, we all believe in Hashem in monotheism. Amru keshem shem b'libecha ela echad, kach en b'libenu ela echad. Just like you believe in one, we also believe in one. Be'ota sha'a patach Yaakov Abinu v'amar baruch shem kevod malchuto olam va'ed. Right? He said baruch Hashem. Thank God. So we do that also. In other words, based on this, when we say Shema, basically we are saying a pledge as if speaking to our forefathers, to Yaakov, saying we are still in it, we still believe in Hashem, and we whisper Baruch Shem as if to like hear the echo of Yaakov saying back to us, right? Very good, wonderful. I'm so happy to hear that. So that's how we recreate that. This whole midrash is actually found in Bereshit Rabbah and even earlier in Sifrei Devarim, a Tannaitic source. So this is actually a very old midrash. Amrei Rabbanan hechi na'abed. So another rabbi said, "What should we do?" Right? We know that this is a great story. I mean, they said it out. Yaakov said it out loud. Should we also say it out loud like Yaakov did? Nomeruhu lo amaru Moshe Rabbeinu, lo nomeru amaro Yaakov. If we say, should we say it out loud? Moshe didn't say it. It's not in the Torah. You can't add a pasuk. Should we not say it? But Yaakov did say it, so it's appropriate to say. So how are we going to fulfill both? That's what we say it quietly. It's not a pasuk, but we say it quietly because we want to remember this beautiful, touching scene, this pledge of allegiance of all the tribes, and be inspired by that. Good. אמר רבי יצחק, אמרה דבר רבי עמה, משל לבת מלך שהריחה סיכה כדרה. אם תאמר יש לה גנאי, לא תאמר יש לה שער. התחילו בעבדיה להביע בחשאי. What is this like? It's like someone else who's torn, like a princess. Who smells some of the dried spices at the bottom of the pot. So she wants to eat it. If she says, "Oh, I want to eat all that, the stuff on the bottom," it's disgraceful to her. This is not food fit for a princess, and so she can't admit out loud that she wants that grime on the bottom of the pot. But if she doesn't say anything, she's gonna suffer because she wants to eat it. So what did she do? So her servants understood that she liked it, and they would bring it to her in secret, so that it would not be disgraceful to her, and yet she could have it. So too, we're stuck. We don't know if we should say it, we should not say it. So we say it quietly. That way we can remember the scene of Yaakov, and yet we're not adding a pasuk to what's in the Torah. אמר רבי אבהו, התקינו שאומרים אותו בקול רם מפני תרעומת המינים. They said the rabbis did at some point say we should say it out loud because of the heretics. When people were saying it quietly, and then the heretics were saying, "Hey, what are you adding in there? Are you praying to Zeus? Or you're adding in some other gods?" And the heretics would accuse the rabbis of saying things quietly because they were hiding something. And so they said, "You know what? We're going to say it out loud now. We're going to say barukh shem kivot olam va'ed." In Bavel, however, in the city of Nahar De'ah, there's no heretics there. So we could still say it quietly. Rabbi Abu is in Eretz Yisrael. So maybe there were Christians there when we know that the Christians took Shema as a symbol for Trinity, and so maybe they were accusing the rabbis, and so the rabbis said we have to say it out loud. In Bavel, Nahar De'ah, they didn't have that threat, so they could say it quietly. I think this is the source for on Yom Kippur we say it out loud, because on Yom Kippur everybody comes, all the people that don't usually come to Bet Knesset, and so among them are, who knows, minim, right, all kinds of people that don't know. Are not learned, so we say it out loud to make it clear for everyone. This is what we say. This is what we believe. We are accepting Malchut Shamayim. Also, that theme is the theme of Yom Kippur, to accept Malchut Shamayim, and so we say it out loud. But all the rest of the year we do like Nahar De'ah, and we say it quietly. And so again, we have this beautiful Agadah. My guess is that the Peshat is the earlier Baraita that we saw above, which is that we say it quietly to remind ourselves to accept the yoke of heaven after we say Shema. All right, and so that is the end of that topic, and now we get to the third item. The third item is that the people of Jericho would reap and pile their grain before the 16th of Nisan, before the omer sacrifice. And the rabbis were tolerant of that, but they didn't love it. So now we're going to see a baraita that is parallel to our Mishnah, and it's going to give two opinions, another lists of 6. Well, the first one would be Meir, the second one is Yehuda. So pay attention to the list, see which one is more like our Mishnah. Shisha devrim asu anshe Yericho, that's the same. Shalosha b'rison hachamim, u'shlosha shelo b'rison hachamim. There's already a little different. 3 of them with the will, according to the will of the rabbis. In other words, the rabbis were good with these things. They said these are positive things. And 3 against the will of the rabbis. So already the criteria are a little different from our Mishnah. They would pollinate the trees all day long. On the 14th, Shema, they would sandwich the Shema. And they would only reap before they brought the omer sacrifice. Doesn't say pile. And the following are the 3 that they did against the will of Chachamim, and here adds Godshin lifnei ha'omer. So you see, our Mishnah says reaping and piling together as things that were tolerated, and in this version it says the reaping was tolerated, but was positive, and yet the piling was negative. Okay, this is something that's added. פורסין פרסות בגינותיהן בפרדסותיהן, להאכיל נשר לעניים בשני בסות בשבתות וימים טובים. They would make holes in their fences so that the poor people could come into their gardens and their orchards, so that they can eat that which falls, the fruit that falls on its own on Shabbat and Yom Tov during drought years. So there was not a lot of food around, so they would allow the poor people to come in and take any fruit that fell onto the ground. Usually fruit that falls onto the ground on Shabbat, if you don't pick it up, it's going to rot. And this was a year of famine, and so they permitted the poor people to take this. So this is just a longer version of what we already have in our Mishnah, which is that they would eat the fruit that fell on its own on Shabbat. Umatirin gamziyot shel hekdesh shel charuv shel shikma, and they would permit to take the branches of hekdesh trees from carob trees and sycamore trees. Okay, this is just a little bit more elaborate versions. It's missing the peah, but it adds in the godshin is prohibited, right? The rabbis protested the piling of the grain. That's all to be meir. Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda. The first three you said were with the will, so that means these are positive things to do. So everybody should do all these three things, right? We should do consecrated Shema. That's positive. Yes, everybody should do that. It doesn't make sense. It's improper language, right? You didn't interpret it correctly. That's not what they didn't say. B'rtzon chachamim. Ela elu ve'elu shelo b'rtzon chachamim. All six were against the will of the Chachamim. They didn't like any of them. But the first three, they kept quiet. They tolerated it because they're not so bad. And only the last three were bad enough that they did rebuke those people. And what are the six? Now this Baraita repeats the six. This six is exactly the same as we have in our Mishnah, just with a little bit of elaboration. ואלו שלא מיכו בידם מרכיבים דקלים כל היום וקורחים את שמה וכוסים וגודשים לפני העומר, the same three. ואלו שמיכו בידם מטילים גמזיות של הקדש, של חרובין ושל שקמה, או פורסים פרסות בגינותיהן, פרנסן להאכיל נשר לעניים בשבתות וימים טובים בשני הבסורת, right? They made holes in the fences. They allowed the poor people to come and get the fruit. ונותנים peah לירק. This does have, like our Mishnah, that they would give a corner of the field for vegetables. ומיכו בידם החכמים. And the last three, they did in fact prohibit. Now, why do we bring all this? Because you see, it says kotzrin v'godshin lifnei ha'omer. Then so in this, which is what we also have in our Mishnah. Okay, now comes the question. By the way, so you see that our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, right? This is Rabbi Yehuda. It has the same six in exactly the same language as we have. So v'saba Rabbi Yehuda kisila shelo b'rtzon chachamim. Now, according to this, even the reaping is in the first category, and this would mean that reaping was also not according to the will of the rabbis. According to the Meir, it was according to the will of the rabbis, because that's in the first category. Only piling is not in the will of the rabbis. According to the Yehuda, both are not according to the will of the rabbis, because he said none of the six are b'rtzon chachamim. All right, but here's the problem. We have another Mishnah. There's a Mishnah Masechet Menachot that says Anshe Yericho kotzrin lifnei omer b'rtzon chachamim, that the people in Jericho would reap before the omer according to the will of chachamim. Oh, that sounds like Rabbi Meir. V'godshin lifnei omer shelo b'rtzon chachamim, but the piling was against the will of the rabbis. And the Mishnah continues and says, "V'lo michu b'yadam chachamim," and the rabbis did not rebuke them. Well, this language of the "lo michu b'yadam chachamim," that's the language of Rabbi Yehuda, which means that Rabbi Yehuda agrees with this Mishnah. If Rabbi Yehuda agrees with the Mishnah Menachot, then he should say that the rabbis would be fine with the cutting before the omer, and yet he included it in the category of kotzrin. Ve'godshin lifnei omer, kotzrin, among the things that the rabbi said is not okay. See, according to our Mishnah, this Baraita, Rabbi Yehuda says cutting before the omer is not according to the will of Chachamim, and according to this Mishnah, which Rabbi Yehuda agrees with, it is according to the will of Chachamim. That's the contradiction. We'll spell it out. Man shamat le'damar michu v'lo michu. Who uses the language like this? Rabbi Yehuda. And yet the Mishnah says it's going to the will of the rabbis. Okay, our answer is going to be erase the word kesira from the Braita and also from our Mishnah. The Biuda did not in fact think that there's a problem with the cutting. If there was a problem, then you would have 4 items that you have to kisira and gedisha. You have to add another one. So erase it. In other words, when we have this contradiction, we're going to prefer the Mishnah Menachot and fix our Mishnah in that regard. Good. Now, man shamat led amar michu velo michu. I did that. Okay. And now we get to the next item. Umatirin gamziyot shel hekdesh. The people in Jericho. So now we're getting to the last 3, which the rabbis did protest, that they use consecrated branches. Apparently, Jericho thought that only the trunk is consecrated, the branches are okay. Then it's going to talk about the fallen fruit, where they say it's only a problem with the fruit on the upper branches, and because we'll see why, and not mukseh because the ravens could eat them. And then we'll talk about the peah on veges, even though they skipped the maaser, that the Gemara is going to say their dispute is only about the turnips because they can be pickled. All right, this will make more sense when we see it inside. Now, so these trees, Amru, Abotenu lo hikdishu ela korot. The people of Jericho said, our forefathers only consecrated the trunk of the tree, so we don't use the trunk of the tree. And therefore, they cut the branches, and we too, anything that grows from the trunk is permitted. And so they would cut the branches and use the branches for themselves. Shel charu v'shel shikma, of these 2 types of trees. These types of trees in particular, the sycamore is known to grow after you cut. You cut a branch and it grows again. You cut a branch and it grows again. So these were very useful and were treated, in fact, in that way. Okay. And we're talking about things that grew after the fact, right? I mean, the first generation, they cut the branches and then they consecrated it. But the question is, what about anything that grows after they consecrated it? The people of Jericho followed the opinion that there is no me'ilah. You don't violate misusing holy objects of things that grow afterwards. They agree, the rabbis agree that you wouldn't be chayav me'ilah because you didn't actually consecrate the branch. However, it's nevertheless prohibited. I think it's very interesting that the Bavli frames it as a kind of machloket, that there's 2 opinions here. I mean, the people of Jericho were not sages, they were not rabbis, they were following some practice that was not within the orbit of rabbinic halacha, and the Bavli is kind of analyzing it as a rabbinic halacha. I'm going to see that again soon. Porsin pedasot. Now, the next item, that they would make holes in the fences to allow poor people during a time of drought to take from fallen fruit, which is a nice thing to do, but there is a problem of having fruit, of consuming fruit that fell on its own on Shabbat and Yom Tov. We're going to see 2 interpretations, as they're talking about the upper fruit on the upper branches or fruit that fell onto the lower branches. Amar Ula, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Ula's version of Resh Lakish's statement is machloket b'shel machbedot. The machloket, right, this controversy between the people of Jericho and the sages, is only talking about that which falls onto the upper branches, and you have to climb up there in order to get them. The Rabbanan sabre gazren an Shema yaleh v'yitlosh. Because Rabbi said there's a gezerah that if you allow them, then the people, they're not just going to reach for them. They're going to climb up the tree, and you're not allowed to climb up a tree. That's isur of shivut. And the Bavli explains that because you might pick things that are up there. So there's a problem, even though these things fell off, still a problem to use the tree. And the people of Jericho said, we don't make that gezerah. I mean, if you understand it as a gezerah, it makes sense. The people of Jericho, they didn't have this rabbinic gezerah. Originally, it's actually a shivut because it's not restful to go up a tree. But that also, the people of Jericho did not have a problem with that. But if it falls onto the lower branches, everyone would say it's okay. Good. Ravad says, Ula, what do you mean? Okay, it's okay in terms of this, that you're not going to climb the tree when it's on the lower branches, but they're mukseh. right? Well, when Shabbat started, they were attached to the tree, and so you didn't have them in mind that you're going to eat them. And now only now they fell, so you're not allowed to touch, not allowed to move them. Or maybe you'll answer, even before Shabbat, I had in mind this fruit that's on the tree. I have some ravens. This will be the raven food. So I have them in mind. They're for use for my property. So since I had in mind that ravens can eat them, now that they fell, I can eat them too. Maybe you'll think that. That is what we're going to conclude. But here's the problem. Lave muchan la kilabim. Hashtag muchan la adam. Lahave muchan la kilabim. We have another principle that if something was you had in mind to be human food, it's not fit. It's not prepared for dog food. What's the case? Titnan Mishnah says, "Abiuda omer im lo hayta nevela mer b'Shabbat asura lefi she'ena min hamuchan muchan l'arbim have muchan la'adam." Okay, if I had an animal that, let's say, it was nevela before Shabbat started, that's okay. I can take that and feed it to the dog because, right? What else are you going to do with a nevela? You give it to the dog. But let's say an animal that was alive when Shabbat started, a nice fat lamb. I said, one day I'm going to make this into lamb chops. So you had in mind this is going to be food for a human being. You can't eat it on Shabbat because it's alive, but that's what you had in mind. You weren't going to feed it to the dog. Now all of a sudden it dies on Shabbat. It's nevela. You cannot feed it to the dog because it's mukseh. You didn't have in mind beforehand that you're going to give it to the dog. So therefore you see something that you had in mind to be human food, you cannot give to the dog. If that's true, then something that was only you had in mind that would be raven food, all the more so, it's only fit for that. It's not fit for human food. And so even though this was not mukseh as raven food, it still should be mukseh for human food. That was Rabba's question. Amar le in muchan la'adam lo have muchan la'kelabim. You're right. I do agree with your principle that if something was human food, then it's still mukseh to use as dog food. Because if someone has in mind that I'm going to eat it, then I say I'm going to eat it. I don't think anyone else is going to eat it. Right? We're very speciocentric. So muchan la'arbim ave muchan la'adam. However, if I had in mind this would be raven food, I also have in mind, hey, if it comes to me, I would eat it too. Right? So we always are going to prioritize the human need for it, and that's implied in the raven need. However, if I assume I'm going to eat it, I don't assume I'm going to share it with my dog. Anything that's fit for human beings, we have in mind that we are going to use it. Okay, so all that was one version of what Resh Lakish said, that the machloket is regarding the upper branches. But we have another version. Ki ata Rabin amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Rabin had a different tradition of Resh Lakish. Machloket b'shel kefin. They are only talking, the machloket was about when it falls onto the lower branches. The rabbi said it's mukseh. It's true, on the upper branches you had in mind that the ravens would eat it, but that's not good enough for humans to eat it. And the people of Jericho said, no, even since it was mukseh for orvim, it was not mukseh. You had in mind that ravens would eat it, so too humans can eat it. So again, here, right, we have this. The rabbis are analyzing the practice of the people of Jericho as if it's like a rabbinic opinion. They're bringing them into the rabbinic orbit. But they were on the upper branches. Even the people of Jericho would prohibit because you might go up the tree, right? Probably historically, the people of Jericho, had some amount of halacha, but not all these other details that the rabbis had taught, and that's precisely why the rabbis were against it. Okay, and the last item, venotnin peah la yarak. They would leave a peah, the corner of their vegetable garden. Vegetables aren't necessary for giving peah. What is the criteria for what you have to give as peah? Hold on. Do the people of Jericho not have the following Mishnah? See, again, the rabbis are assuming that the people of Jericho were like new Mishnah by heart, right? And so what do you mean? Didn't they know this Mishnah? Here's the general principle. What do you require to give as a corner of the field? For which species? Kol shu ochel. First of all, it has to be food, something that you're growing for a dye or something else. You don't have to. V'nishmar, and it's something that you protect, right? You want it to be there, not just weeds. Gidulo min haaretz, something that grows from the ground. Likato ke'achat, and something that you reap all together at the same time. And you gather it, you store it and preserve it. Chayab ba'pe'ah. Let's see examples of each of these things. Kol shu ochel. What does it exclude? This is to exclude woad and safflower. These were used for dyes and not for food. So if you're growing this, you don't have to give peah. It makes sense because peah is for the poor people to come and eat. It's not for them to come take and make dyes out of. And so it has to be protected. If you have an area that you don't care about, anyone can come and take it. It's free for all. You don't have to leave peah. It has to grow from the ground. Not truffles and mushrooms. You don't have to give peah on those. Figs, you reap them as they ripen, a little at a time, not all in one shot. So you don't have to give for figs. And it has to be something that you can preserve. And that excludes vegetables, right? So it includes like grain. You dry out grain and you store it up. But vegetables, you don't do that. And so that's the question. The people of Jericho, didn't they know this Mishnah? It says, parat yarak, vegetables, you do not have to give pe'ah. Why did they give pe'ah on vegetables? Answer, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, hacha berashe lefatot askenan. Oh, we're only talking about the heads of turnips. Turnips, they're not going to be preserved, but if you pickle them, then you can preserve them for a long time. So the machloket between the rabbis and people of Jericho was, if you can preserve something through another substance by pickling it, then is that considered preservation and fit into the last category or not? The people of Jericho said yes, that's called preservation, and it requires pe'ah. And the rabbi said, no, that's not considered preservation. It does not require it. Okay, so again, we are rabbinizing the people of Jericho, even though they probably did not know this Mishnah, and they just were following some kind of more peshat of the Pesukim that says, leave a pe'ah of your field, so they assumed that means a vegetable garden also. Who were these people of Jericho? We'll end with an insight from my colleague Aharon Amit, who wrote a whole commentary on this perek, and he gives a very insightful theory that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Damascus document, it says, Al yochal ish b'yom ha-Shabbat ki min ha-muchan. A person on Shabbat may not eat any food unless it was prepared, you're ready from before, or also min ha-oved basadeh, that which was abandoned in the field, which suggests that fruit that falls out in the field would be permitted according to the Dead Sea sect. And so now we have the people of Jericho doing something very similar. And this makes sense. Jericho is right next to the Dead Sea area. The Dead Sea sect was wiped out in 68. What happened to those people? Probably a lot of them died in war, or they just, they joined in with the majority. But it looks like some of them and some of their practices may have actually continued. So the people of Jericho are these semi-sectarian, semi-rabbinic group that as time goes along, they become more and more rabbinic. And our Mishnah, we actually see the process of the rabbis imposing their halacha on these people, on this group. And so based on this, we could get an amazing hint as to who these people were, and we can really see the process of transition from Second Temple sectarianism to the time period of rabbinic authority actually in process, and this amazing Mishnah and this discussion. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.